Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eve Eurydice, and today's guest is the writer Sarah Gerard. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah. Sarah Gerard is the author of a number of books, including Sunshine State, an essay collection about Florida, where she's from and where I now live, Binary Star, a novella, chapbooks, the novel True Love, and today we'll mostly focus on her latest book, which is titled Carolyn Coco, and it's a true crime story about her friend who was murdered, Carolyn Bush. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed the way that you wrote the book, the way that you organized it, and I had this feeling when I was reading it that we should try to have a book like this for every at least female victim of an insane murder, and how transformative that would be, for the dominant narrative that we have. That seems to almost idolize the murderer in some way, and normalize femicide. And to me, this was very much like the modern 21st century face of femicide. You no longer need to be married or even romantically linked to the person you live with for them to
Right.
just take out their violence on you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And admittedly, my husband and I watched the docuseries, both seasons about Robert Durst,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's, I guess, the first thing that comes to mind. There has been a dominant narrative that, which is not untrue, that women are killed most often by men they trusted. And I think to the general, the first thing that comes to mind for someone who's been in a heterosexual relationship is, oh, my boyfriend or my husband. But it could also be my brother. It could also be my
Mm-hmm.
roommate. It could just be
Mm-hmm.
my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And, like as in the case of Robert Durst, he killed not only his wife, but also his best friend of, many, many years. So, yeah, but I think the important thing to remember is that it could be any man you trusted. It could be your father,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Just the domestic. There is something about domestic cohabitation that seems to
Mm-hmm.
reassure the unsub, the murderer in some way, or to maybe give rise to these urges that come from 7,000 years of patriarchy, right, where women
Mm-hmm.
had no personhood. So that's, epigenetically, that's like a long time of a certain cultural norm compared to like what, the mid 60s? I mean, it's been a very short time that has no longer been the case, right? So you live
Mm-hmm.
with a woman, there is definitely that gut instinct that, oh, that's mine.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm married, and
Mm-hmm.
my husband and I sometimes joke, oh, like, well, you're just my property, so X, Y, and Z, but it's actually true. But yeah, I guess maybe we're making light of something pretty dark, but that's
Mm-hmm.
written into the script, right?
Right. I mean, I think, like honestly, of course it's romantic. There is a sense of romance that I'm willing to give you everything, even my kind of self
Mhm.
ownership. But, we
Mhm.
don't really mean it. But the
Mhm.
place where it comes from, I think, that was the case. If a woman had
Yes.
any personhood, it was silent and secret and hidden within her
Right.
person. Fathers had the right to kill their daughters.
Mhm.
Husbands, had the right to kill their wives. There were all kinds of
Mhm.
honor crimes where, for the
Mhm.
sake of the male honor, women could be killed legally.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's just a very
Yeah, and
long
that's
tradition.
and that's still the case in some places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
In many places. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Around the world. Yeah.
Yes, right.
For our audience, I just want to say that Carolyn Bush was a 25-year-old poet, and she lived in Queens, in Ridgewood. She was killed in 2016 by her roommate, who was a 26-year-old. His name is Stetson-Shanahan, and he attacked her out of nowhere. She was on the phone, and he claimed that he said something, no, a non sequitur, like what's up, or something like that. And took
Mm.
a dagger that he had recently bought, just stabbed her 7 times to death, and then stabbed himself, went out, acted out, and shortly thereafter was arrested. And he claimed, or he confessed immediately, said he didn't remember doing it. He had a psychotic break, may have had like some sort of dormant psychosis that he wasn't being pharmaceutically treated for. And then his lawyers have expanded that or spin that and said that it was cannabis-induced psychosis that he was suffering from, because he was high and drunk. He had done weed and beers at his brother's. That's the main crime, the horrific, very heart-rending and maddening,
Yeah.
the loss of life. And I must say that I appreciate that even though you've done an enormous amount of research, you have found a way to not be controlling it from the top, to not be insisting on there is one authoritative voice and I'm just going to tell you, who she is, what happened to her, who is guilty.
Mm-hmm.
You've tried to have a multiplicity of points of view and narrators, and otherwise give her and her world as much agency and voice as you can, while still being the author of this book. So I think that that's a very interesting and brave undertaking.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to sort of rewind to the description of what happened after Render was arrested. What I know is so I don't know what happened inside Render's mind that night. I only know what he has said at different times. So publicly, or to the court. He said to a reporter just after who visited him in jail, like just after the murder, he told her that he had been burying his anger at small annoyances, is the way that he was quoted in the article. He also described in the article to this journalist who wrote in her article that he had experienced a certain set of symptoms. We also found out later from his medical records, which went into evidence, that he had told a doctor that he wasn't sure if he was hallucinating. So so and that could mean any, so these symptoms could mean any number of things. He also told the reporter that he had been depressed for a while but never sought help. In court, we found out that that his mother had suggested to him, and while he was still an undergrad, that he should get therapy, and that he probably didn't do that. So all we're really left with, I can't venture any kind of a diagnosis. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I don't have that kind of training. So in the book, what I tried to do was present a few different options for sort of interpreting the data, but I don't know what those I'm not a medical professional, so I can't tell you what those data actually add up to in the end, or whether there even is some diagnosis to venture. But the actual defense that they argued was that he had experienced marijuana-induced psychosis, meaning a short-term effect that is only triggered when he smokes weed, and isn't tied to some other diagnosis that would be perhaps lifelong. Yeah, so they literally argued short-term insanity, temporary insanity.
I don't mean to laugh, but they honestly came up with, the judge, presiding the case, to be precise, not they, but the judge, believed the most exonerating narrative, I think, of all options.
Well, he gave Render the responsibility for having decided to smoke the weed anyway, even though he'd had adverse reactions before, and found him, he found that Render was responsible for the panic attack that caused him to murder Carolyn. That was the narrative that the judge thought was most believable, I suppose, is that he had a panic attack, and that's what made him...
So it became manslaughter that he was convicted for, and not murder.
Correct. Yes.
And he was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Is that it?
Yes.
Which, again, to my mind, seems extremely
lenient. Yes, yeah, I would say so. Yeah, he might have been, he could have been acquitted though, so it wasn't the most lenient possible outcome, but but compared to the highest charge that he was facing was second-degree murder. So yeah, it falls somewhere in the middle, trending toward the most lenient.
Yeah. And this kind of like marijuana-induced psychosis seems to be a defense that's becoming more...
it seems like it's becoming more common.
Yes.
That was what we understood when... but it had not yet been used in New York State, but it had been successfully argued in other places. I think Oregon was one of them.
And then we've heard about it more since. And again, go ahead.
Well, I sometimes now, because the internet knows what I've been searching for years, it feeds me clickbait articles and stuff about something called scromiting, which is a combination, which reminds me of marijuana-induced psychosis. And I know that marijuana-induced psychosis is a thing, but usually it's for people who are like, chronic users and have other underlying mental health conditions. So that was what was so surprising about Render making this plea. But I have been reading articles, or I've come across a couple articles recently about scromiting, which means it's a portmanteau of screaming and vomiting that happens, I guess, when someone is like overdosing on weed products, or has been like a years long daily chronic user, where they end up in the emergency room because they can't stop screaming and vomiting, and the only way to stop is to just never smoke weed again. And so, I mean, I do think we're in a new era of marijuana usage where it's very acceptable recreationally, and it's treated as though it has all these medicinal properties, and it's marketed as this very sort of benign, fun, accessible thing, and comes in different flavors and colors, and all these different varieties tailored to your personality, and it's got this whole scale of THC content and other, and everybody is like an armchair scientist when they walk into the dispensary now. And I just think that it's no wonder that things like this are becoming more common, or more commonly reported on.
That's
as well.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And you live in one of those states that has been transformed by legalizing marijuana. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a whole industry now, and now we're getting into psychedelics.
Wow. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, now we're talking about capitalism, like, the capital of, entertainment expands to include altering consciousness, altering psychedelics and drugs. And it's all the rage. I mean, microdosing with mushrooms, ketamine, and weed of, in every iteration, as you said. I mean, personally, I cannot handle it. Knowing your limits is the basic, most ancient definition of sanity, right?
Right.
I mean, there is like, the culturally described sanity that comes to us from the outside, where you have to be a certain way to fit in. But the real sanity is just knowing what your limitations, your strengths and your weaknesses, for yourself, and trying to stick within those boundaries. And I for myself found out super young, like in college, that it's not for me. I get extremely disturbed, both psychologically and physically, not mentally, but psychologically and physically. I feel extremely unbalanced and unsafe, and like balance for me is health, so why seek to imbalance myself? Definitely did feel nausea, and nausea makes you want to vomit, and that makes you want to scream. So what we're talking about is like, it's not so unusual. We're acting like, there is like a new and bizarre it's like, no, people used to go around New York and they had lost their minds after one trip.
I think that still happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm not there anymore. So,
I'm not either, but I was there like a couple of years ago, or I was there actually last week, and I saw a lot of that still.
yeah, so these are serious things that should be included in every conversation, about drugs and legalization and usage and, dosage and all of that stuff. But to go back to your book and Carolyn's story, I think that the majority of your description centers around the trial, because it comes in the book. It comes before actually like their life stories.
Yes.
And what I found personally interesting was that in the context of that trial and the verdict that we just discussed, there were all the letters written by friends and family of the killer, who were praising him as an artist and a wonderful young man and a gifted this and an upstanding member of society, and as if the killing hadn't happened. Oh, but for the fact that he murdered this young woman, if we just kind of forget that for a moment, it seemed like insane, and it's very much weighted by issues of privilege, wealth and fame. So his father was Danny Shanahan, who was a very well known, for people in those rarefied social groups, in New York, a well known cartoonist for the New Yorker for like 30 years. He'd published like over 1,000 cartoons in the New Yorker, which gives you a certain status in the Northeast. And his mother was an administrator at Bard College, where both sons, the parents had two sons, both of them went to Bard, graduated from Bard. The mother had gone to Bard, graduated, and then worked at Bard. Now, I myself went to Bard for my undergrad, and then my only daughter also recently graduated from Bard.
Oh, wow.
and Botstein was the president, when I was there and when my daughter was there.
Yeah.
So, like an entire lifetime later, he was still there.
Yeah.
And your description, of things, monorain, kind of royal control of the school, is very accurate. So yeah, it felt
glad to hear that.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that. It was a very enlightened and artistic and open college environment. I mean, I had gone to NYU first, and it was too much for me, and I transferred, and I was much happier intellectually at Bard and worked with great mentors. But the issue of it being male dominated was everywhere. There was no question that there was a male dominance in the type of thought, the type of intellectualism, the type of understanding of the cool, what's a cool thing to do.
Yes.
My point, there was still a lot of sexual harassment. So beautiful girls got special treatment. And gonna say that in my daughter's recent tenure there, that was improved. I definitely felt that kind of like romanticization of a certain macho edginess was intact, and I think that's because the leadership was intact. So I'm sure the donor class is pretty much intact. And so it's interesting that Mr. Botstein wrote, I think, 2 letters to support the lenience, on behalf of lenience for Render.
I think for my interpretation was that it was a very institutional choice, and that it was an attempt to protect the integrity of the institution and the public image of the institution. I see this sort of hierarchical thinking, underlying that kind of a choice, that like he is the face of this. I think his ego is very merged with Bard, with the institution of Bard.
Yeah, he's Bard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it continues to expand. I just came across an article. I was sent an article, I think yesterday or the day before, about Bard purchasing, making a, I think, $14 million real estate purchase. So the kingdom expands. I see it as this sort of amoeba, like expanding. I don't know, almost like bacterial process. He's a very good fundraiser too, and I think that's his. Number one job there,
Mm-hmm.
aside from setting the culture.
Yeah.
Which is like cult of personality too, I think.
Had the killer had different representation, come from a different, socioeconomic group,
Mm-hmm.
had no access to this kind of letters, from upstanding members of society. The
Mm-hmm.
his sentence would be harsher. It's just completely speculative, but one can't help but speculate on the effect on the rest of his life. I mean, he's gonna walk out,
Mm-hmm.
and continue to have a life.
Mm-hmm.
For all we know, he may even, he may profit from this whole glorification that some women in our
Mm-hmm.
society give to killers of, other
Mm-hmm.
women, of fellow women. For all I know, he's already getting like love letters in prison and will come
I've
out with
wondered
like a
that.
wife.
I've wondered that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not open to public record request. I've checked.
Oh, you did
We
check.
can't, we
Yeah.
can't, yeah, I did. We can't look at his mail. Well, they did it for Colorado made, oh my God, what is his name? Shanahan was his victim's name. Oh my gosh, but then their last name is escaping me, but he killed his wife and two children, two daughters.
Uh-huh.
And he's been in prison ever since,
Are you talking
and the
about
state.
Lacey Peterson and Scott Peterson, or?
Oh, actually, yes. I
Okay,
think that,
okay.
yeah, his love letters were made accessible, and you can read them online, and so that made me wonder about
Mm-hmm.
renders too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I haven't yet identified a way to access them.
Well, if I'm not
I am
mistaken,
curious
speaking of
though.
this guy, he keeps trying to get a new trial. I don't know if he got one, but
Hmm.
the capacity of the human language. I'm going to say the language as well as mind, to kind of justify
Mm.
the unjustifiable, to justify the most monstrous behavior is like never ceases to amaze me. I don't know if women do that.
Anybody who's committed such a horrible crime has to do that. They have to
Mm-hmm.
find some. I just took a certified forensic interviewer prep course online, and
Uh-huh.
I'm getting ready to take the test. And when you're one of the things I think about in the class is interrogation techniques, including presenting themes basically to the subject, the person that you're interviewing, and we're making available to them a way to save face. You have to, in talking to this person, just getting to know them briefly, identify the areas of their life where they feel kind of most protective, or maybe let's just say the things that matter most to them. Is it family? Is it reputation? Is it their career? Is it, finances? Like what was sort of going on in their life that could justify the choice they made. If I robbed a store, oh, I did it because I'm falling behind on rent and I have two kids. But so yeah, I have no doubt that this is, of course, any plea that a defendant presents in court is gonna include some of those themes.
Yeah, but I do also
So.
think that at least men have a capacity, perhaps because this has been their culture and their language, right? For again, for
Mm,
thousands of years, women have been excluded.
mhm,
So it's very
mhm,
recent that women have kind of had entry, and
mhm,
many of us still feel that we're kind of borrowing, these words and this,
mhm,
reasoning and this logic. It's not like natural to us. We just have had to adopt it. So having been here for so long in control of civilization, let's say. I think it just comes to them more easily to kind of justify taking extraordinary power and control over another. Like most women, I would think, and again, I apologize for generalization, but I think that most women would still tend to justify committing violence as a form of self-defense. I was protecting myself, rather than this was something that made sense within whatever, let's say, my psychosis of the moment, or some other similar breakdown of an otherwise normal life and function. I think that there is a normalization that goes on of these breakdowns into violence, and maybe like men have had to be in for a lot longer in war zones, right? And again, where like violence had to be normalized. You break out into violence and then you return to like not being violent, and that's sanctified. So there is a lot there.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I mean, the one thing that criminology knows, and this is the only one thing that has been proven, let's say, is that men commit more crime than women. So I mean, I think, yeah, but everything else, of course, is unknown. Is it biological? Yeah. Is it, is it the learned behavior, enculturated? And then, what are we calling a man?
Yes. So. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a big one.
And yeah, so yeah.
Just on a very minor historical note, his father was arrested for possession of child pornography.
He was arrested. Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't go to trial. He died before.
Right. He
trial.
died before in 2020. So 5 years after, or 4 years. Sorry, 4 years, something like that. After this murder. So tell us a little about now your decision to write this book. You met her in New York.
We worked together at a bookstore.
She had co-founded or collaborated in a literary non-profit called Wendy's Subway. One of the last things she did was to propose to write about community by using Roland Barthes' concept of parataxis, which is putting seemingly diverse or even contradictory statements next to each other. It seems to me that that's one way that you chose to organize your own narrative, through parataxis.
I think it was a sort of reverse process. I wasn't initially thinking about parataxis. I was gathering information from many years, and then and then by necessity, I had to do something with that, synthesize it into a narrative to be shared with others and hopefully understood. And I needed to, sort of speak through this material, but I didn't want my own voice to drown anyone else out, and didn't think that I had the most to say, or even the most important things to say about Carolyn. And I fully admit other people were closer to her than I was. So I asked them to trust me with stories about her, and then place those stories in chronological order to tell the reader Carolyn's story, the story of her life, in a more or less seamless way, but also leaving gaps for the reader to animate. I don't think that I told the story in its to completion at all. There's so much more to know and learn about her still. But yeah, that was sort of that was how that came into play, and or how that form, I guess, came into play. But I was also asking people to share her writing with me, and Rachel Polinsky of Wendy's Subway told me about this project they were working on, writing about community, and that was a term Carolyn had selected and intended to write out sort of, her own definition of the word, or how it operates in her life, and or her understanding of it. And then she never had a chance to do that. So those kinds of coincidences are kind of beautiful and powerful, and that was the kind of, I guess, magic about Carolyn that I was looking for as I
Mm-hmm.
was researching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There were all these little signs that I was sort of on, that I was on the right track,
Mm-hmm.
with what I was paying attention to, and I I tried to look for those.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book that she liked astrology, and I did get that sense too, that it was almost, it was a little bit like also reading like a spread, like a tarot card spread.
I
You,
like that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of read one after the other, and what you just read informs what you read before.
One of my earlier ideas was to organize the book around the tarot, but that felt a little too much, too constrained to me. I didn't know, I didn't think that the story could fit neatly, or that it would really come across to the most number of readers, I guess. And I don't know, I'm also not an expert tarot reader myself. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I'm still, I am learning, but I don't have like a daily practice at this point. So, or I don't know. I guess, my tarot practice is sometimes involves the cards directly, like a deck directly, and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes I'll just listen to a podcast about a certain card, and or about a certain suit, and yeah. And then I
Interesting.
like to make, like I'll sort of make up my own image for a card that I'm meditating on for a while.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, I mean, you do make collages, and that might be an exciting project. You and your husband
Yeah.
could do it together, or that. I mean,
Yeah.
that might be really fun.
Yeah.
Kind of a
Yeah.
new kind of tarot deck.
I've made like 10 cards now, just 10 of the major arcana.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, I definitely will make more of them. I uh just am so busy right now. I haven't had a chance to really sit down and make a card in a little while. And um
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe it serves to explain too that like the phase of the deck that I'm in now is the Hermit card. So,
Hmm. I'm in the
which
same
seems,
phase.
oh yeah, uh-huh,
Not
yeah.
fun.
It's a
Yeah.
slower phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Although, I mean, it took me 6 years to make the strength card, or 6 months to make the strength card. So, it takes, I have to kind of meditate on a card for a while before I can make it. The
Yeah.
phases move slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a project for the ages, and the
Mhm.
and also kind of like, putting in words the meaning of the card is an equally
Mhm.
like great challenge, but
Mhm.
it does affect, I mean, it does change the readers. I was actually in Boulder, Colorado, near where you are, and someone gave me the
Mhm.
Mother Piece tarot.
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
the way, I guess forget who made the deck, but whoever made it, like, obviously was inspired by Women Who Run with the Wolves or something, this whole
Uh-huh. Yeah.
view of like feminism at that time, using those cards. They're circular cards, and
Mhm.
it was such a different understanding of the familiar concept.
Mhm.
It did kind
Mhm.
of, I've changed my, my relationship to the cards, and then overall
Mhm.
my consciousness ever so slightly. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's not a, minor undertaking. Like, it's very
Mhm.
sacred,
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. My first deck was given to me by my friend Jess Rulifson, who is a really brilliant comic artist and lives in Boston now. If you want to look up her name, yeah, you'll love her work. But she gave me my first deck because she knew that I made collages. It was a collage deck, and it's made with these very, they're not like my collages at all. They're very stylized and like 1950s and 60s, sort of these vintage images,
Mm-hmm.
but also kind of absurd and even like kind of weird and gross at times, but in a really delightful way. And yeah, when I use that deck, it's completely different. And I feel like, the Rider-Waite deck,
Yeah,
I,
that's
you
yeah.
know, that's sort of the standard, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I learn, I learn a lot about the tradition of the tarot listening to podcasts and reading books about the Rider-Waite deck, and but I also have some books that kind of look at three different decks at once, and venture in interpretation, and I appreciate just the long history and tradition and depth of the deck too.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
variety, I do think that the imagery is just as important as the sort of history and um,
Oh yeah.
interpretive meaning of the cards. There's not like a one-to-one,
No. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, like way to read them at all. And I just think it's a
Yeah. Yeah.
really endlessly fascinating tradition.
I agree. I agree. And I mean the icon because it's iconography. You write
Yes.
image, right? And then when we read it, we study the image, and through obviously something else comes to us. Through use and familiarity. But it is still that there is like a focal point on the card on that image, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then you transcend it. But the
Mm-hmm.
image is used as a portal. So it is
Right.
the
Exactly.
icon is very important. If, depending on what you
Absolutely.
focus, you gaze on and I feel that that's a more female gaze.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Right. There's not a there's no dogma
Right.
about
Yeah.
the cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a very queer feminist
Right.
history and practice.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Giving value and validation, cultural value and validation to a practice, the intuitive reading.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think it's
Mhm.
like a great feminist choice that takes you out of the mainstream cultural like self-presentation and into something a little more essential. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it opens up, and I guess that's probably what Carolyn appreciated about it as well.
Mm,
She was
mm,
curious about the occult and or different traditions.
mm-hmm,
I'm thinking of the scene in the book where she reaches out to Adjoa the day before she died and offered to, asked Adjoa if she wanted all of these herbs that she was getting rid of. She had too many herbs in her house,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and then sort of passing that on to Adjoa through this, traumatic moment, kind of became like Adjoa said, it had been turned into metaphor in a way,
Yeah,
this gesture.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but and there's something about that too. I mean, I think it's just recognizing that we move through energy fields and touch each other in these, you know, cosmic, intuitive, I don't know, yeah, ways,
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. True, true. And I wanna also commend you for bringing attention to the archive, which I think is very beautiful. The
Mm-hmm,
online archive about her,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
which is Carolyn Bush livingarchive.org,
mm-hmm.
and some of the proceeds from the book are going to it, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I think that's wonderful.
The person who created the archive is Pamela Tenen,
Mm-hmm.
who was one of Carolyn's best friends, and wanted to, give a home to the to the stories that continue to be shared about her,
Mm-hmm.
because a book has certain limitations, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. I mean, I
yeah,
went to it, and it's great. It has like, video, or the
yeah,
trial documents as they are.
mhm,
It's in a sense completely free of interpretation,
mhm, mhm,
which is
exactly.
nice. You think at all of that book, Edie, American Girl, the Edie
I don't.
Sedgwick book.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Actually, yes. Yeah. I read it and I was like, oh, this is delightful. This is so fun. And then I read the Edie book, not the whole thing. I think I read like half of it or something. But I also read Please Kill Me, The Oral History of Punk. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I was really into this idea for a minute there, of writing it that way. I even brought it to different, I wrote long parts of the book that way first before I wrote them as like traditional prose. And my dad liked it, and
Mhm.
my mom my mom didn't really get it though. And I was like, okay, well, this sample size is not what I wanted it to be. This is not what I hoped for. So, and then my editor said, no, 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 you have to just like write it. I resisted, at first when people said that to me, because
Mhm.
was still kind of early in the stage of writing what you're reading today,
Mhm.
and I felt like I had really gotten somewhere, and I liked this idea a lot for what it sort of enabled, maybe what it enabled me to do, which is not really appear in the book at all,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
it sort of gave control back to the material. But I guess, I mean, you can't just present material. You kind of have to help your reader understand what the
Mhm.
research
Mhm.
means, and what is this multitude of voices actually saying. It's a little harder to do in a book like this, a book of nonfiction like this, than it was for Taylor Jenkins Reid when she wrote Daisy Jones and the Six.
Yeah. Yeah.
Her
Yeah.
that story is very, it's very neat. It has a limited cast of characters. It has one main story, but there might be a couple of subplots, but this, I think, Carrie, Carol, and Coco ended up with like four different narratives, and just had there's so much. There are too
Yeah,
many
there are four
characters.
different stages. Also, because you covered, because you took longer, the trial happened, so you kind of covered a
Uh-huh.
bigger span of time.
Yeah. Mm.
When I was very young, when I was at NYU, and when I went young, so I was like 17, and my girlfriend killed herself,
Oh, wow.
and it was I mean I was there, so it was took maybe 7 years, right, to overcome it. While being in mourning, all I could do, of course, is write. I mean, being a writer.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I tried
yeah.
so hard. I wrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it. And I really did want for her to kind of present the story and put it out there. And I never succeeded because I was there. I kept
Yeah.
intruding, and my emotions kind of took over. So
Well, of
I do
course, yeah.
admire, I do admire the ability, the self restraint you have shown in telling Carolyn's story.
I just think, yeah, if I had been closer to her, I would have written a completely different book, and I would have been foregrounded a lot more, and it would be much more a story about my own grief,
Mm-hmm.
um and of course Carolyn would be a character, and our relationship would be more, would take up more of the space in the book. And I didn't have that luxury with her, and so this was the result. I appear in the book as much as I felt like it was appropriate to do so, and Pamela was much closer to her, and their story takes up a lot more space.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
she were to write a book about Carolyn, and I hope she does, I think
Mm.
that she would be more of a character in that book. It
Mm-hmm.
would be, and maybe there would be a smaller cast of characters, and it would be, and there would be a lot more material about, the two of them together and their memories together, and
Mm-hmm.
how Carolyn meant so much to Pamela, and how Pamela grieved afterward. And
Mm-hmm.
that would be a beautiful book. But
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's not the book that I could write about her. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did enjoy, the outcome. I did really, as I said when we started our conversation, I actually reading it thought I wish there was a genre, you know,
maybe there will
devoted to
be.
kind of like, telling the story of victims of extreme, like senseless violence through their text messages, their emails, their blog posts, their poems, and whatever, marginalia. I think it would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
a wonderful addition, to the kind of genres of writing that we already have. And
And
go ahead.
Carolyn wrote a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a book of her writing. That's for her estate to decide. But I hope the world gets to know her voice.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
a book under her name.
Mm-hmm.
With her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And it apparently, I mean, so it's because of this research that you're now studying what you're studying. Is it because of?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going back to school tonight.
Oh
The
wow.
new semester is starting now. So,
So how has it
um,
changed your life?
oh, good question. I Yeah, I mean, I think it's changed my career a little
Mm-hmm.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's enabled me to work as an investigator. I work for two different agencies mostly, and when I'm not a student, I will, I think I'll put a lot more energy into kind of launching my own agency, specializing in a certain kind of investigation, right? Maybe interviewing or something, but I'm not there quite yet. So I've been working as
Interviewing. So is it criminal psychology, like interviewing criminals in search of motive? Because the why is big. Is that what you're looking for?
I think right. I mean, I think that's one way to go about it. Yeah, yeah. But you could, I'm also an investigator, so I use other methods than interviewing. But I think, kind of there are different, the agencies that I see in this field, they all kind of put themselves out as specializing in a particular area of investigation. So maybe like death investigation or car crash reconstruction, or
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. So I'm kind of thinking through like what do I have to offer, I guess, as an individual in this field, going about my work. And so I'm going back to school now, majoring in criminal justice, getting a master's in it. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been, I'm on the gender-based violence course.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I think I'm sort of taking an academic approach to this, um, and also looking at, what kind of continuing education I can do to become a better investigator, for the agencies that I already work for. So
So these
I'm putting a
agencies.
lot more,
Uh-huh.
I think I'm putting a lot more energy right now into um, kind of a different area than writing. I mean, I'm still writing, but I only have one brain, so I can only do so many things with it at once. And
Mm-hmm.
but I also know that the next book I publish will be a novel, and I'm looking forward to um, playing a lot more, I think, on the page than I did with this last book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're a writer first and foremost, but that again, that's a choice that I admire, and I hope more writers would make, going back and forth between the life of the intellectual observer
Mm.
and the participant,
Mhm.
the not just the advocate, but the participant. Where you actually
Mhm.
we try to use what we learn to
Mhm.
solve a tiny bit of right, a tiny part of the many unsolvable
Mhm.
crises
Mhm.
in the real world
Right.
around us.
Yes. Well put.
Yeah, so I think that's great that, having spent like 6 years or doing this, research and thinking about it, you can
Yeah.
go back into the real world and say, well, how can I use this to be of good, to be of service practically?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it really puts my writing life in perspective. I think sometimes if we spend too much time alone, we begin to believe we're more important than we are. and
Mm-hmm.
um, and then there's a necessary period, I think, of going outside and seeing yourself as one of literally billions of people on one planet among billions in our galaxy, and
Mm-hmm.
or our universe. And we need to remember that we're actually very small. I
Mm-hmm.
think some Yeah. So that's what I'm doing right now. I think reading about reading in a more academic way I kind of get to take the broad view, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at sometimes like huge data sets and
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, and then you realize like, oh, I could publish, this academic essay, there's this academic article, and I just become like one of thousands of other voices trying to solve this one problem, as you said, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if my research, is doing anything really except getting incorporated into other research that could go on forever because nothing can be ever solved really or proven. Yeah, I think that's actually kind of an important step.
I mean, I think so too, and enlightenment is important. Maybe nothing can be proven, but seeing different points of view and seeing things from, an altogether different perspective is,
Yeah, yeah,
big enough. Like, it's a big achievement.
yeah.
But also, like, real world. Like, let's say you work for an investigative agency and you help solve a crime. Like, that too has
Hmm.
its own huge reward. So there are all
Yeah.
kinds of layers, to how we can, participate, I
Hmm.
think, in this world and be of good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm working on one of those cases right now, actually, where I might have to solve a crime. So wish me luck.
Oh, wait. I think it's amazing. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What?
Sometimes you come across those. I mean, sometimes it's always serious for the people involved, but sometimes not so much a crime as, maybe an accident that you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know, the civil lawsuits are interesting because, you can place a percentage, I mean, in a criminal court you have to prove everything 100%, it's black or white. But in civil court there are areas of gray, and you can place 70% of the blame on one person and 30% of the blame on the other person, so it gets a little interesting and nuanced and in a way that can be fun and I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I think that's great. Yeah, I think it helps create balance, especially for someone who is an intellectual participating in life in this way with some agency and contribution creates an immediacy that
mm,
otherwise we kind of miss when we live in our heads too much. I think
mhm,
that's a wonderful commitment, and I feel that it did come from your commitment to telling her stories. Part of the beauty of you take one step and it can take you on any one of many kind of unpredictable new directions, and there is great beauty in that.
thank you.
Yeah,
I thank
yeah.
you so much. It's
Well,
very kind of you to say.
thank you. Thank you. Loved our conversation. I hope our audience appreciates it as much as I have.
Me too. Yeah, I've
Thank you
really enjoyed this.
for joining me today. Thank you for your work. Thank you for everything that you've shared with us. And I do wish you lots and lots of goodwill and luck and magic.
Likewise, thank you.
And everybody out there, thank you for listening. And until next week, keep speaking light and justice and investigate the darkness out there.